everybody. My name is Julia Armstrong. I'm a member of the board of the Culinary Historians of Canada. I'm pleased to welcome our host for this series, John Ota, who is the author of the best-selling book, The Kitchen, A Journey Through Time and the Homes of Julia Child, Georgia O'Keeffe, Elvis Presley, and many others in search of the perfect design.
Thank you, Julia. Our first guest is Dana McCauley, and then in the second half, we will visit with Susan Musgrave. So thanks for joining us today. Dana McCauley is a Canadian chef, food writer, food trend tracker, spokesperson, and international corporate food consultant. Dana is the former food editor for Gardening Life, Homemakers, and Style at Home magazines. Dana has written 4 cookbooks, including my favorite, Last Dinner on the Titanic. She has also collaborated on In the Kennedy Style with U.S. etiquette icon Letitia Baldridge and Kennedy administration White House chef Renee Verdon. Dana is often called upon to speak about food trends and opportunities for food manufacturers. As of 2019, Dana is the director of New Venture Creation at the University of Guelph, where she helps researchers to create startup companies based on their lab work. Dana was recognized as Canada's Most Powerful Women, Top 100 Award winner in 2017, and honor celebrating female leaders who inspire others. Dana, you inspire me.
Well, thank you. Listening to that, I'm like, wow, I'd love to meet her. She sounds cool.
Dana, I'm going to ask you about your mother and how she influenced your cooking. But first, I'd love to see that photo. Oh, there you are with you with your easy bake oven. So could you please tell us what's going on in this photo?
Well, as you can see, my mom allowed me to dress myself. And really, you know, that this picture is important in so many ways because it does show that exactly what my mom was all about. If you had an interest, she would feed it. And she was very much about letting me explore and be my own person. So the Christmas that I was 5, I got this easy bake oven. And this was between the Christmas and New Year's holidays that this picture was taken. And I'm wearing, you know, polyester hot pants and a polyester turtleneck. It was the 70s, as you can tell. And it really, it always warms my heart to see this photo. Now, my mom was a really young mom, so she was really into, you know, fashion and that kind of stuff. This is a picture of her. I don't know if it turns up very well, but this is her in the late 60s, so just around the time I was born. And you know, her joie de vivre was a big part of why I got to just kind of be myself. She was the youngest of 7 kids, so I imagine that she had a lot of free time to roam and find her own voice as well. But because of coming from that big farm family, needless to say, you had to be involved in all parts of running the household. So it was not considered at all odd for me at age 6 or so to be, you know, using the oven and being in the kitchen and actually helping. It wasn't that she was just trying to keep me busy. So by the time I was about 11, my mom, who was a working mom, she would, you know, leave a whole chicken in the fridge to thaw out, and she'd call me after I got home from school and say, okay, cut up the chicken, peel the potatoes, all that kind of stuff. I had a grandmother who lived with us. I had amazing food memories from my grandmothers as well. But anyhow, long story short is I was a very capable cook, so that by the time I was in about grade 7, I was dipping into cookbooks, and by the time my mom would come home, there'd be chicken marengo, and you know, I was allowed to cook with white wine at the age of 12. So long story short is, you know, my mom, she didn't get too prescriptive. This is a 5 Roses cookbook that is extremely well worn. I have the updated copy, of course, that's nice and glossy, but this one is a keepsake because this was a wedding shower gift that my mom got in 1965 when she got married. And it was our Bible. As you can see, it's got lots and lots of marks, the pages fall out. And this is how I learned how to cook. This and the fact that as much as my mom put bran on everything and had, the Moosewood cookbook and all the things of her generation, she also, because of her youth, and she worked for a time at a very fashionable wig company, which sounds weird now, but in the 70s, wigs were popular. So she was very fashion forward, and we would have, she had no pretense. She'd bring home squeeze cheese because it was new, and Pop-Tarts because they were new. So I always got to, I always got to find that surprise and delight in food, and that's an amazing gift.
Uh, Amazing, thanks. What was your childhood kitchen like? I'm always interested in kitchens, so what
Yeah.
was your kitchen like?
We moved a lot. My parents started out as really young parents. My mom was 21 when she had me. And so their prosperity meant that we grew into nicer and nicer kitchens. But my very favorite kitchen was in a very modest bungalow in North York that at the time the houses were built in the subdivision, the Consumers Gas Company had put in all the appliances. And now I wish I still had that same kitchen. It had a built-in gas barbecue in the backyard, natural gas.
Oh, yeah.
Our stove actually had a salamander, a gas stove. So that's where I was making all this stuff. And now when I hear people say, oh, I can't let my kids cook because we have gas, I'm like, you know what? Like, buy them some ponytail holders and give them a few watch points. And guess what? They'll be fine.
That's great. Dana, can you tell us a little bit about your new venture creation at the University of Guelph that you're working on right now?
Yeah, so it was really exciting when I got to join Canada's Food University back in 2017. They decided that it was time to have even more impact with all the amazing agri-food innovation that comes out of the university. And I got the honor of creating this program where I work with all kinds of researchers, like Canada's smartest people, and I help them to create companies and products out of the inventions that come out of their labs. So our definition of innovation at the university is that we transform inventions into things that real people can use. So not all of them are food companies, but we have, I've got a plant-based soy cheese company and another company that's making some really awesome nutrition products from sour cherries, as well as DNA barcoding companies and agri-tech companies. So it's pretty stimulating.
Great. Did you tell me that you had some artifacts to show from?
I do. I had just had a couple of things because this is a colander, not very glamorous, but this is one of the things that that my mom gave me when I moved out. She bought it at a garage sale when I was about 2. So this is like a family heirloom colander that just keeps going and going, proof that they don't make things the way they used to. And this is actually a real gem. I come from 2 families of lots of cousins. I have about 38 cousins altogether, and somehow I got this cast iron pan, which was part of my great-grandparents' settlers package when they got Crown land on the Manitoulin Island. So this is a treasure. I use it every day. As you can see, it has been broken and welded a couple of times, but it's still one of the best pans I own. And I have a whole suite of copper pans as well. So that speaks a lot about this skillet.
That's great. Dana, when we first met, I went to one of your talks.
Yeah.
And yes, that was great. And you predicted that in 100 years, we will all be vegan, that we will not be eating meat. So I was wondering if you could just elaborate on that, please.
Well, it's the times are interesting, of course. And since then, that was probably about 1.5 years ago that you and I met. And since then, the whole plant-based meat alternatives and all these new engineering feats that create protein out of air and moss and algae and you name it have become much more in the forefront of food news. And of course, now the supply chain issues we're having during COVID-19 are also having us talk a little bit more about proteins and how that kind of thing will change. It's interesting because I come from these big farm families, and I actually have an uncle who's a beef farmer, and I grew up with my mom get with one of her fashion things around the same time she got into making Irish coffees with all the fancy accoutrement. She also got these oval boards for steaks and wooden bowls for Caesar salad. So this was a very big Friday, Saturday night thing at our house to have even an 8-year-old get a whole ribeye on one of these boards. So it's not that I come from this this non-meat eating family, but I do think as we see supply chains get more complicated and meat become more of a status symbol because the price is going to go up, and as we have to deal with climate change, I do think that meat will become more of a special occasion item, especially those premium cuts and those whole roasts and that kind of thing. It'll be, look at the differences between the Edwardian period and the way people ate, the breadth of dishes they would have on the table versus now where you have like a Buddha bowl. And I think we'll see a similar kind of simplification and change, and in the future it'll mean that we eat less meat.
Right, thank you. Well, we're going to think about that. And in the meantime, thanks very much for that. We're going to meet Susan Musgrave. Hi, Susan. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, John. Nice to be here. If you hear any crashing in the background, it's my new sous chef, my kitty called Suki that I've been isolating with on Haida Gwaii.
Oh my God.
If I put her outside, she'll meow at the door and it will distract me. So now she's just distracting me by knocking things over. But anyway, that's the noise. If you hear it, I don't know.
Okay, great. Susan Musgrave has published more than 30 books and received awards in poetry, novels, nonfiction, food writing, editing, and books for children. She lives on Haida Gwaii, you're so lucky, where she owns and manages Copper Beach House, a beautiful bed and breakfast that has for decades played host to authors, prime ministers, artists, and adventurers who visit Haida Gwaii, the former Queen Charlotte Islands. She teaches poetry in UBC's MFA Creative Writing program. Her most recent book is A Taste of Haida Gwaii, Food Gathering and Feasting at the Edge of the World. In A Taste of Haida Gwaii, the famous poet uses her humor and wit to bring cooking and living on the islands to life with stories gathered over decades. With its evocative tales and wild cuisine, this book offers a unique take on food that could only be developed living off the coast of British Columbia. This book is the winner of the 2016 Taste Canada Awards in the Regional Cultural Cookbooks category and winner of the Bill Duthie Booksellers Choice Award. Thank you for joining us from Haida Gwaii, Susan.
Oh, you're very welcome.
How's everything going on Haida Gwaii right now?
Well, we're kind of in lockdown like a lot of other places, but that's unfortunately my guest house, which was fully booked for the summer, is now empty. So I hope everybody comes next year instead.
We're going to be lining up. I'm going to be right there.
I hope so.
Oh, yeah. So Susan, would you be able to tell us about your mom and how she influenced your cooking?
Sure. I probably learned to cook, because of my mother, and not in the most positive way. My mother was lovely, but she was born in 1926. She just died last summer, actually, and I've been going through her recipes. I always think it's the saddest thing that a woman spends a life, and men too, I'm sure, collecting recipes. And then when they're gone, what happens to those recipes? So I have my grandmother's recipes, I have my mother's recipes, I hoard them. And then I think they need to be kept somewhere because it's a record of your life, really, in food. But anyway, Mom, I was born in 1951. And so in the 50s, cooking was, you put the vegetables on to cook at 2 o'clock. That's how my dad liked them, well done. And so I thought peas were kind of, I didn't know they were green. I thought they were something else. Same things, Brussels sprouts, all those vegetables that I now love were something that were quite terrifying when I was a child. But Mom was a baker. She baked bread. I was talking to my brother about how we used to be so embarrassed having homemade bread sandwiches at school because they would leak blackberry jelly, which would then look like blood. And everybody else had Wonder Bread in the 50s and, with cheese slices. But we had these kind of eccentric lunches with homemade cookies, homemade cakes, everything homemade. because I think having lived through the Depression and a war, people had to, they made everything. They didn't go and buy anything that was, what do you call those things that are now mass produced, the food that was on the shelves. Everything had to be made from scratch. That was the way it was. I come from a family where people would make an onion last 27 days in the war, that sort of thing. So I'm pretty frugal with my cooking. I learned that from my mother too. One of my best memories of childhood was we'd go out on my father's boat. Not my happiest time, since he was Captain Bligh on board the boat. Very strict and threatened to keel haul us all the time. But Dad would go on, we went to a place called Blackberry Point, and Dad would put on his sou'wester and charge into the middle of the bushes and pick blackberries. Mom would then, in a 90 degree summer day, light the wood stove on the boat and make blackberry jelly. She couldn't make jam because the seeds would have stuck in my dad's dentures, so it had to be jelly. And the wooden spoon that I have to this day, after my mom died, we went through her kitchen. We were always threatened with getting the wooden spoon, if we didn't toe the line, which was again discipline it was the way children were raised in the 50s. So I got the wooden spoon. I'm very proud of this. You can see the cracks in it. It was probably from whacking me on the bum, but it was also stained with blackberry juice from those days. So
Great.
It's funny how the things you don't think you'll ever want. I wanted that and her Peugeot pepper grinder, because that was, you can buy Peugeots now, but they're not as good, I must say, as anything that was made in the 40s or 50s. They seem to last forever, like refrigerators did, and stoves. My mom always had the same stove year after year. They didn't now, it lasts 10 years. You have to buy a new one.
Yeah. I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about your book, about the Haida Gwaii book.
Sure.
So Julia, could we put up some of those photographs? And there you are. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So could you please tell us a little bit about what's going on in some of these photos? How about that salmon drying rack?
Well, that's down in the village of Old Masset. The Haida fish, of course, and do a lot of food fishing for the elders. And this is one of their ways of course, in the old days, there weren't fridges, so people would have to preserve their foods. There's still a lot of canning that goes on here. People preserve things in different ways. I tend to freeze things, as I'm afraid of canners. Well, I'm getting over it, but I'm sort of afraid of things that might explode. I don't know if they will or not. But so salmon is often dried. It's made into candy, or it's eaten as jerky, actually. So you often in the summer months will see this kind of rack with salmon drying on it. It's quite lovely. It's like salmon laundry, isn't it?
That's right. I'm just going to read something that I pulled out of an article. More than collecting recipes, Musgrave follows the seasons with guides to gathering freshest local ingredients for recipes that reflect Canada's wild West Coast. So some examples are hands-free cloudberry jam, spruce tip mayonnaise, mussels Trudeau, rose spit halibut with wild rose petals. How do you develop these recipes and these dishes? Well,
I think Sartre has a line that genius is not a gift, it's the way one invents in desperate situations. And it's not exactly desperate living here. When I lived here in the 70s on Haida Gwaii, you couldn't really buy very much of any interest in the grocery stores. It was, craft dinner. We had to make bread because the bread was always moldy by the time it got here on the barge. So you end up using what you have, which is, and of course we have a bounty around us in the sea, on the land. So every season, I read a lot of other books from other parts of Canada on the boreal gourmet, that sort of thing from the Yukon. So I'm aware of what's there. And as a child, we always picked blackberries. We picked a lot of blackberry was the main thing, lots of blackberry jelly. So I started experimenting. I experimented in the 70s when I lived here. I made every kind of berry jam, thimbleberry, salmonberry, elderberry. Nothing tastes really as good as blackberry, raspberry, and strawberry, the three kind of main jams, I think. But some of the wild berries just don't have the flavor. But still, you can add them to other things. I make a pear and huckleberry compote, or sorry, not a compote, a crumble, and that's delicious. The cranberries are wild here, so they're really tiny little red jewels, and they're really bitter, so they go well with the pears. Spruce tips, I guess in the rest of Canada you can have the Douglas fir tips too. This time of year when the trees are coming into the little tiny ends of them, you can do all sorts of things. Make syrup. I make spruce tip vodka that I serve to my guests after a meal. And all you do is put the spruce tips in the vodka, let it sit for as long as you can wait. I think in my cookbook it says you grind them, but when I do that, it goes all cloudy. So I don't know if the recipes evolve. I've got their recipes in my book now that I would change because I've made them, and I've had chefs make things that are just fabulous. They've taken the recipe and then they've run with it and made their own version. The halibut with Nootka rose petals was my nephew, Patrick Musgrave, who came up with that. You just pick the rose petals and you put them like scales on top of the fish. Sometimes when I do that, they kind of go a little bit slimy. So the chef that I worked with in Vancouver, and I can't remember where it was, he did halibut and brown butter, and then he took a crystallized or candied rose petal. After I make the syrup, I have all this stuff left over, and rather than throw it out, I made it into kind of fruit leather. So, and he fried a crystallized rose petal in brown butter and served that on top of the halibut. Very simple, but it was so much better than my recipe, so that has to be in my next book, I guess.
That's great. We're going to go to the Q&A section now, but Susan, can you just show us the cover of your book?
Yes, I can, with the gold stickers. I like this version better. I had to purchase these myself because publishers like to imprint them on. It's cheaper for them. But I thought, remembering the effect of a gold sticker when I was in elementary school, I thought I want a book with gold stickers. So there it is.
So there it is, A Taste of Haida Gwaii, Food Gathering and Feasting at the Edge of the World. Thank you. Julia, how were our Q's and A's? Do we have any Q's and A's?
Yes, we do. We have a couple here. And one question for Susan, well, for both of you. Is there a lost recipe that you wish you could retrieve from your mother or grandmother? Susan, why don't you start?
Well, yes, there's a recipe my mother had called forgotten chicken, and none of us remember it. So that's all I can say. So that's it. I have my grandmother's recipe for rock buns. She always used bacon fat. Again, being in the Depression and the war, they'd cook bacon. They wouldn't want to throw away the fat. I think we're not supposed to do that anymore. But so they tasted so flaky and lovely, and I didn't taste the bacon. They tasted like scones. But I have those recipes. I haven't lost them. But forgotten chicken, it's forgotten. Maybe for a good reason.
Dana, what your...
Oh, wow. How do you follow that? But I do have a recipe. My heritage on my mom's side is Ukrainian. And my baba, that's the Ukrainian word for grandmother, was an amazing cook. And I learned how to bake at her side because she baked by feel, not by measuring. One of the things she made, though, so our family is from a part of the Ukraine that sometimes was Romania, sometimes was the Ukraine. So a lot of Romanian influence in what she made. And she used to make this stuffed bread, which some of my cousins don't even remember. So I think she made it because she knew that we really liked it. I don't think it was a big hit at everybody's house. And we had a name that we pronounced Plachinets, but figure out how to spell that, could never ever find that recipe. And then actually when I was judging the Taste Canada Cookbook Awards a couple of years ago, I was very fortunate to get one of Naomi Dogood's books and found in that book something that was almost exactly the same. So I have been making it and have been tweaking this recipe a little bit each time I make it to get closer and closer to what my grandmother made. And interestingly, in Naomi's book, the source is a Georgian source, which of course is very, very close to where my family 4 generations ago is from. So I did have a forgotten lost recipe, but thanks to another awesome Canadian food writer, I'm back in business.
We have a question for both of you. Do you think the pandemic will change how people cook and how mothers and children bond in the kitchen? Dana.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, I love that. I'm very involved in social media. I love to muddle around out there and learn new things. And I really love seeing how many people are using cooking as part of homeschooling. And most people are pretty busy these days, and their children don't often even have a chance to see their parents cook because they're at lessons and such. And the other part, though, the downside about this COVID experience, of course, is the economic impact. And I think that we probably will see a lot more people cooking more often because of needing to be very budget conscious. And of course, there'll be a lot less opportunity to go to restaurants if there's only half the seats available, and unfortunately fewer restaurants. We're going to need to do a little more home cooking. So a bit of a silver lining, but yeah, it's a tough time. And you know, I don't fault anybody for right now just living on toast and jam for a couple of days, because you got to do what you got to do to get through.
Yes. And Susan's just going to answer a question a little bit about how you think mother's role in teaching children to cook may have changed over the years, and what you observe in your community.
Very simply, if you love cooking, that love will be transferred to the child. I don't think my mother loved cooking. In those days, people would sit down at the table, eat. Nobody would say, "This is delicious" or "Thank you." It was just, seemed to be what happened. And I'd be horrified if that. I like people to react. I mean, to say, at least to say thank you, because they put a lot of work into a meal. And I think people are more aware of that now. There's more camaraderie around the table, more, at least with my grandchildren, I see that. They take part in it because their mother loves doing it. They don't see it as a chore. It's something to the time together is to be relished. And they take the skill. They both my granddaughters are 10, and they both cook by themselves now. And they'll prepare a meal for their mom when she gets home. I never would have done that. My father told me when I was 10, "You're so useless, you can't boil an egg." And that was, again, discouragement has always played a huge role in my life. It's encouraged me. And I don't know how I would have turned out if I had been encouraged to cook. I might not have cooked at all, but I had to show him that I wasn't so useless. But that message is there in my head when I go to cook. This is going to fail. And I think, where is that voice? Oh yeah, hi, Dad. And I think it was their own, in those days, my dad felt inadequate. And, if you feel adequate as a parent and you're happy and you love what you do, the passion will be passed on.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, I'll pass it back to you. Thank you both
Julia.
for answering
Thank
those
you.
questions.
On behalf of the Culinary Historians of Canada and Julia Armstrong, I'd like to thank Dana McCauley and Susan Musgrave for being with us today and sharing those fantastic stories. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Susan. And thank you for joining us for Behind Every Great Cook is a Great Mother. In the meantime, please stay well, please stay strong, and happy cooking. Thank you.